Ali. I really appreciate it. And good afternoon, everyone in KSA. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I apologize for the technical difficulties. It's a little early in the morning here, about 7 a.m., a little past that now, but I will try to make up for the time that we spent trying to do the technical stuff. The topic that I'm going to talk about today is how to build an effective employee mentoring program. And just to share a little bit with you, I will give you a little bit about my background. I've been involved in human resources, talent development, and creating mentoring programs for over 35 years. I have an extensive background in training and development, and I've started a number of companies and also been the head of training for a Fortune 500 company. So I've worked both with small organizations and very large organizations too. As I travel around and look at audiences that are interested in this topic, it does show that there is a global need and interest in how we can help people within organizations grow and develop. And so I wanted to share with you, starting out of the gate here, a little bit about some research that's been done both in North America and globally to indicate why this is such a hot topic area and why organizations are interested in it today. First, you may be familiar with the Gallup organization. They do both surveys and research and have done this for many, many years. They recently conducted a survey, and one of the things they found out in this survey is that 71% of the new workers that are joining organizations today, what are sometimes called Millennials, which is now the largest employee segment that's joining the workforce, are not fully engaged on the job. And what we mean by engaged is it used to be the old employee satisfaction, where our employees happy with what they were doing, but today it goes far beyond that. Not only do we want them to be satisfied with what they're doing, we also want them to be motivated, and also we want to be able to retain them. Gallup went out and did then a global survey, and they found that clearly over 900 million employees are not fully engaged at work. So I think we can all see that there's a huge potential out there, and also a huge challenge to keep our employees motivated and satisfied on the job. Another survey conducted by a group called the Achievers indicated that 78% of leaders and managers in organizations are concerned about, and it's one of their top concerns, this concept of engagement and making sure they get the most productivity out of their employees, and also employee retention. That same survey, when they asked additional questions, found out that this new generation that basically is joining the workforce, 51% of them do not expect to be with their current organization for more than 12 months. So I'm sure you can see that this is a huge need within the marketplace to say, how do we address this kind of a challenge? And indeed, 28% of people that do end up leaving organizations leave, basically, they indicated because their supervisors did not give them the freedom to act and to be empowered, and in addition to that, also did not give them the feedback and reinforcement that they expected on the job. And this last little indication right here, I think, is something very revealing, and it kind of points out how our world is changing today, and that is that 13% of these employees that were surveyed would be more likely to stay if they got peer recognition. So it's not only that they get feedback from their supervisors and bosses, now as we have a new generation of employees joining the workforce, peer recognition is becoming much more important. So there's a saying that's out there that's been around for a while that, if you hire people, people join organizations, but they leave organizations because of poor leadership or supervision. So this is something we're going to be addressing in the next few minutes as we talk about techniques that we can use to build effective coaching and mentoring within your organization and help overcome some of these challenges. Last week I was at another conference, and I was speaking about the same topic, and as you can kind of see here, this was called HR Southwest. It was held in Dallas, Fort Worth, Texas. We had 150 people for seating in that particular session, and the session was filled up, and had standing room only. So as in the past month or so that I've been going to a number of different conferences and speaking about this particular subject, we find that there's a tremendous amount of interest in this particular area. Now, I'm going to be referring to some research and some academic kinds of surveys and things that are out there. And I'm showing you a picture here from where I'm calling. This is not today, although it's quite foggy here today in Des Moines, Iowa, where I'm calling from right in the center of the United States. What we're looking at here is one of our rather severe snowstorms that can occur in the Midwest in winter. I had the great pleasure a few years ago of traveling to Riyadh, and I know while this may not be a typical picture for KSA, I did, I think, have an opportunity to kind of get in a sandstorm there. I think it's called a haboob or something. And so I know, whether it's snow and ice or sandstorms or dust or whatever, we're all familiar with bad weather and how that can impact what's going on. But the reason I'm showing you this picture is a few weeks ago I got a call from a young man that I hired. He's no longer a young man, so this was 25 years ago. And he came from Southern California and moved to the Midwest where we have this kind of weather. And he had just graduated from university. And he called me up and he said, "Frank, I just want to say thank you." And I said, "Well, that's great, Matt. What are you thanking me for?" And he said, "You gave me my first big break, my first opportunity, and that made all the difference." He said, "Today, I now manage a $200 million division of a major international publishing company, and I never would have, had the opportunity to do that if you haven't given me that first chance and moved me to Iowa." Now, the reason I'm showing you this little slide about this snowstorm is because when he moved out here, Southern California is very tropical and very temperate, and he moved, and one of the first weeks he was out here, we had a particularly bad snowstorm, and he called home to his mom because he was quite young, and he says, "You're not going to believe this, but there's snow that's actually blowing horizontally across the horizon here. They're having something called a whiteout." And so anyway, we laughed about that. But it was gratifying to me that he was giving me feedback that I may have helped him at some point in his life. And so I have this slide up here that says, have you had anyone that's ever changed your life or made a significant difference in it? And typically when I go out and I ask the different audiences this particular question, invariably I see hands go up, and they always tell me, and it's almost universal whether I travel in the United States and Europe or around the world, that they can tell me stories about somebody that made a difference in their life, that basically gave them a chance or an opportunity or gave them special attention, such as a coach or a mentor might do. And you may have had an experience maybe with a teacher or a professor, maybe somebody that's a supervisor, boss, or a parent or a relative or whomever. But basically, we've all had these experiences when somebody gave us special attention and gave us what I sometimes call the power of a high expectation. They believed in us, and they took time to basically help us, and that made all the difference. Some of us, and when I talked to a lot of people out there, it actually was very formative in helping them choose what career or what life path they wanted to go down. There was a recent survey that was completed of 500 executives of top, Fortune 500 companies, and they asked them, how did you get to the top of your organization? And so they rank ordered 10 different elements, and number one on that list was, at some point in my career, early in my career, I was given a tough challenge or problem or project, and I was able to complete that or solve that problem, and that helped me in my path within the organization. The number two thing in terms of importance with all those CEOs and CXOs was, early in my career, somebody took me under their wing or basically became a mentor for me and helped me guide my path early in my career to start out in that organization. So even though we'll talk about some research that shows the power of having a mentor or mentoring program, I think we've all had personal experiences where we can reflect back and find somebody who's helped us and probably given us, an opportunity in our career. So I don't know if you ever go out and look sometimes on websites, but now it's real popular to do this texting and instant messaging. And so there's a site out there that shows kind of some funny ones that are out there, and I've shown one here. And this is not a good example of what you might expect from a mentor or a coach. But in this instance, someone has a supervisor or a coach that is in the sales area, and it says, Ali, how was your first week selling in your new territory? And Ali responds, it was really fantastic. I got to see 3 HR directors and an SVP. I made an incredible presentation, and it's so good he wants to, have me come back and schedule a demo. And then the response back in check says, yeah, I didn't sell anything either. So in a humorous sense, I just wanted to kind of reflect on the idea that if we become involved in a mentoring program or whatever, we want to make sure that we're setting the right example and sending out, good messages to those people that we're working with. So to start out here, I do want to do one thing, which is to kind of define a couple of terms, because you'll hear me use them back and forth. But technically, there is a difference between coaching and mentoring. Typically, coaching, when we define it, is something that's a little bit more direct. In other words, your boss or your direct supervisor may coach you, and particularly this may have something to do with the position that you're in, and it's typically short-term, and you're looking for some kind of quick, measurable result or turnaround. So if you do performance appraisals, or you're doing some kind of performance review or management, typically this is where coaching comes into play. It's usually performance-based, and it really talks about how giving information about how to do something differently or how to improve. Mentoring, on the other hand, takes a little bit longer time frame, if you will. And typically in larger organizations, it may not be the supervisor or the direct boss of that person. It may be somebody else within the organization who has a broader view, who may take a career orientation rather than just something that's happening in that person's position. So we talk about mentoring dealing with broader goals and career objectives. It's usually, instead of performance-based, more developmental. In other words, we look at a time horizon that may be longer. And instead of just giving how-to advice, there may be a lot of questioning that goes on, and a person provides, guidance more than just providing advice. So I just wanted to kind of clarify that difference a little bit. There is a lot of research out there that shows, both in North America and internationally, that if we put together effective coaching and or mentoring programs, and especially if these are tied in with developmental activities, we can get a very significant return on our investment. So for every dollar or euro that you spend, you can typically get, $5 to $8 back. So if you're involved in human resources and you're looking to validate whether or not you want to start a system, you can use some of these studies and also this information and go to your CFO to say, if we do this well, we can get a very significant return on our investment. So what I want to talk about in the next, few minutes with you are 4 basic steps in how you can build an effective mentoring program. And I'm going to start out and talk about how you build a strong foundation for a mentoring program. Then I'm going to talk about how we can purposefully go out and architect a system. So when I talk about being a system architect here, I don't mean technically like a chief technology officer. I mean being a human resource system architect, if you will. The third step is to find the right champions. In other words, don't do it alone. Find people who can help you with this mentoring program. And typically I'll talk about the higher up they are in your organizational structure, like the CEO or a CXO, the better. And then finally, in today's world, even though we had a little difficulty starting out this morning, leveraging technology can give you tremendous benefits, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that too. So these are the building blocks for really creating an effective mentoring program. So I'm going to start out with the first point, start with a strong foundation. Now if you look at this diagram, it looks like a construction diagram, And typically I tell the story. I actually have my company in Des Moines, Iowa, but I live in Dallas, Texas, and I fly back and forth every week. So I am an extreme commuter. But there's a difference between building a house in Des Moines and building one in Texas, which I'm doing right now. In Texas, the land is such that it moves around a little bit, so you can't build basements. But in Iowa, you can have basements. But in both states in the United States, we have these storms that come through. You've probably seen them on the news. They're called tornadoes. In Iowa, we typically go down and head to the basement if we get one of those warnings. In Texas, since we don't have it, we typically build what's called a human safe, if you will, and bolt it to the concrete foundation. But anyway, in both of those instances, when you build a house or you build a structure, you want to start with a strong foundation. The same is true with a mentoring program. Now here I'm going to show you a picture of one of my mentors, and one of the reasons I got involved in this whole area of human resource development or training and mentoring. His name was Joe Batten, and I joined his organization. That's why I moved to Des Moines, Iowa. And he wrote a book many years ago called Tough-Minded Management. And as a part of that book, one of his main tenets was, if you're going to work with people as a leader, or if you're going to work with them as a coach, you should always build on their strengths. And he gave the example of a report card. If you have young children that are of school age, and they bring home their report card, you may have had the same experience I did when I was raising my kids. And if they brought home straight A's, but all of a sudden I could see one B or one C there, I would immediately go to that one area where they needed to improve that grade, and I would sit down and say, son or daughter, let's have a discussion about how we can bring that B up to an A or that C up to a B, whatever the mark or the level is. The challenge with that is, according to Joe, is we're not focusing on what that person does well naturally. We're not focusing on their strengths. We're actually focusing on an area where they don't do well. So one of the things we talk about when you build a strong foundation for a mentoring program is to talk about what is the philosophy you want to use in your organization to build that program. One of the ones we do is to build on strengths, and others try to identify people's natural talents and their natural tendencies and try to improve upon those. In this particular instance, you can see that this particular student didn't do well in mathematics, and maybe mathematics is not something that they naturally want to do. There's a book out there that's called Strength Finders 2.0, and it's an excellent book because it was also produced by someone that worked at the Gallup organization, and it allows you to go through and fill out a survey, and then they give you feedback about the potential strengths that you have and your natural talents. So one of the things that we talk about is when you build a mentoring program, look at a strong foundation. You could build it on strengths. Some people take a model that they want to use. For example, I'll mention in a minute one of the experts that we use, Dr. Lois Zachary, who's written 5 books on mentoring skills, and she builds her programs around a learning model. In other words, if you're going to mentor someone, you should use a model for employee development or learning. You could also, with your system, use a career model. In other words, you decide to use mentoring to help somebody in their career path within your organization. You might want to use a performance model. So you might tie it in, for example, with a performance appraisal system or whatever. Whatever you decide to do, whatever philosophy or whatever approach you use, it's important to have a consistent model for your foundation. And so that's one of the things that we talk about when we talk about building a mentoring program. Now, I don't know if you ever have an opportunity to go out and watch TED Talks online, on YouTube or anything like that. I'm kind of addicted and hooked on it. But the most watched TED Talk that's out there that had over 35 million views came from a gentleman whose name is Sir Ken Robinson out of the UK. And he told a story about a woman named Gillian Lynn. And when Gillian was young, just about 8 years old, her mother got a call from the school principal. And the school principal basically said, you've got to come and pick up Gillian because she's being disruptive in the classroom. She won't sit still, And the teacher is kind of getting frustrated with this, and I think you need to go and have a doctor examine her, and let's have a discussion about, maybe some potential problems that Jillian is having. So as all good mothers would do and parents would do, Jillian's mom took her to the doctor, and the doctor examined and talked to Jillian a little bit and talked to the mother, and the doctor did something very, very wise. He got up and he said, I'm going to go talk to your mother out in the hall and have a conference. And as he got up to leave with his mother, he saw Jillian sitting there kind of tapping her feet. He went over to a radio. You can imagine this is back probably in the 1950s or so. And he turned some music on in the radio. And then, as he left, he kept the door open a crack, and he watched as Jillian sat there. And what happened? Jillian started to get up, and she started to move, and she started to dance, and she started to sway to the music. Now, if you follow the story along, you'll realize that Jillian Lynn actually became a prima ballerina in the Royal Ballet. And when the doctor came back in, he sat down with the mother and he said, I don't think there's anything wrong with your daughter. I don't think she needs medication. I think my best advice I could give you is get her to a dancing school. Get her to a dancing school, which is exactly what the mother did. And then Jillian did become a prima ballerina in the Royal Ballet, and eventually she met up with a gentleman named Andrew Lloyd Webber, and she became the chief choreographer for Broadway plays such as Cats and Phantom of the Opera, and became a multimillionaire based on her choreography of different shows, etc. So the point that Ken Robinson makes is simply this. In a lot of our school systems, sometimes we want to treat kids that have natural talents, and we may not be looking at where their strengths and skills are. So to me, this is a wonderful story that says, if that doctor had tried to medicate her or done something like she had some kind of attention deficit disorder or whatever, we never would have discovered what, Jillian's true path in life is. So I use this as a story because if you build a mentoring program based on people's strengths, you help them discover what natural talents they have. And so that's one of the things we talk about in terms of building a strong foundation. Here's another one of those little funny text messages, and it says, oh no, another one of John's team members just left to work for a competitor. You're kidding me. That makes 1 in 2 months. Now what do we do? We could conduct some exit interviews and see why they're leaving, and then have a candid conversation with John. And then the final little response comes back and says, or we could just sit back and hope something magical happens. Laugh out loud. Now the reason I share this little texting, messaging back and forth is simply this. My second point is, when you're setting up a mentoring program, become a system architect. It's amazing as we go out and we study and work with a number of different organizations, and we've worked with hundreds of them to set up mentoring and coaching programs, how many organizations want to leave that system up to chance? In other words, they just want it to be organic. Maybe somebody will link up with a senior level executive and they'll hit it off, and then they'll have a conversation or whatever. We're working with a very large corporation right now, and we were interviewing some people. They have a mentoring program in place, but when you talk to the mentors and the mentees, they kind of go like, well, every once in a while I get a call from my mentor. We have a discussion. I don't know really what we're supposed to be talking about, but it's a good discussion, and then, they won't call me for another couple of weeks or months or whatever. So we're big believers, basically, in not leaving anything up to chance. Recently, I attended an HR show out in Las Vegas, and as you stay in the hotels there, or if you're in Monte Carlo or whatever, you know that there's a lot of gambling that goes on. So we're big believers, when you're setting up a mentoring program, don't leave it up to chance. Actually try to architect and create a system, based on some kinds of plans, and don't leave it up to some kind of chance if you can. So if you look at mentoring applications and how they can be used today, there are a number of different ways that you can kick off a mentoring program and not leave it up to chance. For example, mentoring can be used very effectively in onboarding and orientation programs. We've already talked about how it can be used for performance coaching and improvement. You can use it for career planning or succession planning within your organizations. Sometimes it can be topic related or issue related. Right now in the United States, we have a big program going on where we're trying to help U.S. veterans who are returning, from war, basically fit back into civilian life. And so we're doing a program on mentoring of veterans in an organization. So that could be topic related. You can see some of the other ways that this can be used, but when you architect a system, our recommendation is to start small and look at a specific area where you think that system may have great use, and then build upon that strong foundation from there. We have a research paper that we've put together just as an example to show you what I mean by how you can architect a system. And this is available if you want to go on our website, and I'm sure we can put a link on here with the folks that are conducting the webinar today. But this is free if you want to look at it. So what I'm going to be showing you, there's a lot more detail in this particular research paper if you'd like to access that on our website. We call it true development. And so when we build and architect a system, and we want to go out and help people develop and grow in an organization, we look at three elements. One of these elements is assessment. So we're big believers that you should come into, when we work with an organization, we typically do what we call an organizational assessment or a situational analysis, where we go in and we try to find out about the culture of the organization. We try to find out if there are any gaps between what their vision and mission says and what's actually going on in the organization. And then we'll assess the team, if we're working with the team, even down to the individual level. The importance of assessment is simply that everybody is different, has a different set of strengths and needs, and if you can find out about these particular differences and these needs, you can design a mentoring program and work with a person based on the needs, not just something that's generic. So we always start out with assessment. The second thing we do is we always try to tie mentoring and coaching in with some kind of a development program. The research I indicated where you can get 500 to 800% return on investment typically comes from tying coaching and mentoring in with formal training or other types of training and development activities. Now, there's an interesting rule that's out there that was done by the Center for Creative Leadership, that when they looked at leadership development and other types of training within an organization, it's called the 70-20-10 rule, that most learning and development that goes on in an organization, truly 70% of this is what we call experiential or informal. In other words, if I was being developed within an organization, just as I mentioned that somebody, one of those CEOs in that survey that I mentioned of the Fortune 500 executives, the number one thing they said that helped them get to the top of that organization was early in their career they were given a tough assignment, some problem to solve. That's what we mean by experiential. It's not classroom, but basically what it is going out, doing a job, doing an assignment, maybe shadowing somebody, but it's informal in nature or experiential. 20% of that is social in nature, and typically social used to be working with your supervisor to be coached, maybe working with a mentor, but more and more we see this in terms of peer relationships. You'll remember the research I cited in the beginning, that clearly 12% of people were more likely to stay if they got peer feedback and reinforcement for doing a good job. So peer relationships are becoming much more important now because of social and mobile tools that we have available in organizations today. And really, literally only 10% is formal. So what we talk about is when you design a mentoring program and you want to tie it in with your training and development programs, you should look at the mix of 70% experiential, 20% being social, and 10% being formal. Here's another one of those little text message things. I need you to prepare a training program on business ethics that I can deliver next week. Presumably this person is developing that program for him, but I don't know if I'm qualified to write it because I've never done that before. And then the person responds back, don't worry, just go out and steal something off the internet. So this could be again, a mixed message that somebody's sending here in terms of growth and development. One other thing I wanted to point out is that even if you put together an effective training program, the effectiveness of that training program can drop off over time. And so one of the things that you see a lot of research out there about is if we put on an effective leadership institute or an effective employee development program, and then that person goes back from that formal training program back on the job, the effectiveness and the retention drops off dramatically after a few weeks. So in order to do that, we've examined why does that happen, and here are some of the reasons why it can happen. But the most important thing is there's a lot of research that shows if you want to have people retain that information and knowledge, so it really does affect their performance and does affect their behavior change, reinforcement is one of the key things that you can do to help those people retain those positive behaviors or those positive performance changes. And in order to do reinforcement, that comes back to this third leg of what we call this true development model, which is basically one of the best ways to reinforce training and development is to have coaching and mentoring, or also peer review and feedback. And in fact, a recent survey just came out from the Brandon Hall group that rank ordered all the different types of learning modalities that people use in organizations, and the number one most highly effective, learning modality or approach was to use effective coaching and mentoring. Second to that was on-the-job exercise. So I hope you see a theme that's coming through here when I talked about with the top-level Fortune 500 executives. Number 1 and 2 in that survey indicated that on-the-job, challenges were, and also coaching, and this is being reinforced by this particular study. The third point is, I call it find the right champions within your organization. If you're setting up a mentoring program, you want to make sure you have reinforcement. You want to have cheerleaders, if you will, people who will support the program. I always say don't do this alone. So if you're the head of human resources, or you're putting together a mentoring program, or you're tying it with leadership, whatever, the higher up you can go in your organization to the CEO level or the CXO level to find the right people to reinforce this, to champion the cause, not just to support it, but to actively participate in the program, the more effective it will be. But the other thing I want to mention here too, and again it's coming out of our research, and this is growing in importance, is to consider various types of mentoring. The typical traditional mentoring is the one I've been describing, where it can be one-on-one. Typically you have a senior level person working high potential new employee, and you want to make sure that that person can basically experience some wisdom and information sharing from somebody that's been experienced in the organization. That's what we call traditional mentoring. But our research has indicated once you go out and start doing that, when we would go back to senior level people and ask them how that mentoring relationship was going, they would give us feedback that says, what? I'm actually learning as much or more from my mentee or the person that I'm mentoring. And a lot of times it will be, since I'm older and I may be in the baby boom generation, I may be mentoring that's a millennial or now even a Generation Z. These are young folks that grew up in front of smartphones and social media and mobile technologies, etc. And so they're teaching me how to use that technology. So a big part of this is, in our research, is you'll see reverse mentoring take place. It's a two-way street back and forth. So that's one-on-one or reverse mentoring. You could also do one-to-many. A lot of times if you're conducting, let's say, a leadership development program or some other employee development program, and you want to follow that group so you can reinforce the effectiveness of that training, you can do one-to-many instead of just one-on-one. And then this final thing is where you have many-to-many, where you can actually use peer groups to reinforce and mentor other people, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. So here are some best practices that we can share with you, sort of like benchmarking tips. If you're setting up a mentoring program, number one, it's simply to start slow. Don't try to do a big ribbon-cutting ceremony I often call this sort of like the Bill Gates when years ago they launched the first Windows program, and he was standing on the big stage and he hit the button and the whole system crashed. I can assure you that if you're going to a mentoring program, even though you may want to announce it and do a lot of stuff, start slow and start with maybe a beta or a pilot program, and don't risk everything if out of the gate it doesn't work exactly like you want. Another topic that we talked about is to get top-level support, but it's more than just getting a letter from your CEO or some kind of a comment in an all-staff meeting. If those people at the highest level can actually be involved in the system, that will reinforce other people wanting to participate and join in the system itself. Another thing I talk about is try to find people that will be great mentors in your organization. And there's a difference between what I call a developing mentor and a rainmaker. Typically, a rainmaker we use in North America as a term, somebody who brings the goods in, gets the big deals closed. It's typically used in sales or sometimes in technology to say, this is the person that really makes things happen. But in many instances, these people, even though they're very competent individually, may not always be the best person to develop others. So when you're thinking about setting up a mentoring program, always look for people who have developed other people. How do we find those people? You can actually go out and do a survey, or you can simply go around and ask people, in your career in this organization, is there anybody here that helped you out, gave you advice, and did that developmental role? And a lot of times you'll find some people that could be potentially great mentors or coaches within your organization. And then the final thing we say is, again, don't leave it up to chance. You know, just because people may be good developers, you may have good subject matter experts out there. We always encourage people to train your mentors and train your mentees. I think early on I mentioned Dr. Lois Zachary, who's one of our experts, and we've developed a 16-module training program around her theories. She's written 5 books and over 100 articles. And so she has a very detailed program based on a learning model that helps train mentors and mentees how to effectively get involved in a productive mentoring relationship. So we're very big believers in using whatever resources to help train your mentors and your mentees to help guide them to success. Now, if you start a mentoring program, you may find that you're going to run into some roadblocks or challenges. Here's a few that we have found. Sometimes it can be difficult to coordinate and manage the process, especially if you leave it up to an organic kind of process. It might be challenging to identify or develop qualified mentors. Sometimes it's hard to match these people up. In other words, who's going to be a good match for this person, sort of like Match.com, if you will. How do we make sure that they're going to be compatible, that they have the right skill sets to help this particular person out? Sometimes if it's a manual system, it's hard to measure the effectiveness of the results. And the most important, I'm going to jump right down here, is that, and the reason most mentoring systems don't succeed is everyone has good intentions and they want to help out as a mentor or a mentee, but because of busy work schedules and loads and everything else, it becomes inconvenient for both the mentor and mentee. Now, there is a way to address these kinds of things. This is what a traditional mentoring program can kind of look like, and it can be very time-consuming, but that brings me to my last point. Just as we're using technology today, for me to come halfway around the world to share ideas with you, you can use technology and leverage technology that's out there. Some of it's free technology, or some of it's very inexpensive, and some of it may be technology you're already using today in your organization. But if you leverage technology, it can basically overcome many of these problems that you might have. So for example, many programs that are out there that are available will automatically manage and administer the process. So it cuts down on a lot of the manual processes that people have when they're setting up a mentoring program. It makes it very easy because they have algorithms that match up qualified mentors with mentees that have particular interests. You can also make it virtual, so just as I'm having a live synchronous conversation with you today, that's very, very effective. I might want to do face-to-face at some point in time, or I might even do it asynchronously, like those little text messages that were going back and forth. Again, technology can allow you to make the system virtual and make it much more convenient. I often say, because I travel every week and I'm on a plane, my most productive time is 1 hour before I actually step on a plane, because I'm in the airport, and if I use technology, which I do on my smartphone or my tablet, I can actually follow up with my mentees. I can do it at the airport because I'm not being interrupted, and when I step on my plane, I'm ready to go. So again, leveraging technology can help. It can save time, but most importantly, it can make it very convenient for busy executives and busy mentees and high potential people as they have to work throughout their day. This is a little time and motion study that shows you about some of those kinds of things and how much time can be saved if you leverage technology. Most of the technologies that are out there today have algorithms, as I say, that will match up people's skills, knowledge, and ability and competency areas, potential interest areas that they might have based on, compatibility. But most importantly, it can help them schedule out their availability. So if I'm at that airport and I have made a commitment to mentor somebody, I can show them my availability, I can schedule things and make it much more convenient. So I want to just wrap up here and leave it open to some quick questions when I say, if you want to build an effective mentoring program, start with a strong foundation, whether it's a strength-built foundation, a learning foundation, a career foundation, and then become a system architect. Don't leave it up to chance. Don't go to Vegas or Monte Carlo. Actually think about how you want to roll the system out, how you want to build it, what the purpose of the system is, and let it grow from there. Find the right champions or people to help you. Look for developing managers who will become good mentors. Look for high-level people to support the program and participate in it. And finally, if you can, look at all the different choices you may have to leverage communication, technology, meetings, etc., or look at programs out there that combine it all together. When you do those things, you're going to start with a strong foundation to build an effective mentoring program. So I look like I'm getting close here to my time, and I want to be respectful of that. I know everybody's probably busy at the end of their day. Ali, I wanted to open this up to some questions, if you will.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Russell, for a very interesting presentation. Folks, we are now open for question and answers. If you have any questions, you could put it in the question or chat box, or you could raise your hand. There's a hand icon available on the webinar console. So if you click on it, you will be able to speak to Mr. Russell also. Let me go straight to the question box. There's a question already posted. Mr. Russell, do you think psychometric tools used to profiling of candidates for identifying their needs and roles are actually effective, or they are just commercial tools?
I think there are some assessment tools out there that can be helpful. My personal bias is when I look at using assessments, if you just sit down and have a conversation with someone and ask them what their interest areas are, where they'd like to grow and develop, what kind of developmental activities work with them, it can almost be as effective as some of the assessment tools that are out there. So before you go out and maybe spend a lot of money on some of these different types of psychometrics or other kinds of tools, I think sometimes just a good conversation with someone will reveal a lot of information about that person. Now beyond that, if you understand how that person learns and how that person communicates, those can be very, very helpful tools too. But I don't think it's always necessary to use those kinds of things, but we are big believers in having conversations and basically tailoring that mentoring relationship based on the mentee's needs and desires, where they want to go and grow.
Okay, thank you very much. We have another one. Who should initiate the mentoring culture within the organization? Is it HR, or it should come directly from the top management?
Well, I think HR, basically is going to have to be the one that coordinates and puts it all together. But I can't overemphasize the fact that having the highest level of support and involvement is absolutely critical. You know, if you think about it, let's say you want to, you know, work with a group of high potentials in your organization, and you have a very large organization. If I come in to a system or I see that there is, you know, a notice from the CEO or a CXO, the head of a division or whatever, and he or she is personally saying, I support this program and I will be involved in that program, then you're going to get a lot more interest in what I call WIFM, what's in it for me. And today there's so many social programs out there like Yammer and Jive, and they get in organizations and get a lot of participation, and that you know, drops off. So having high-level support and involvement can fuel the fire, and that person becomes a champion for the system. But I think HR has to basically do all the work, because most, you know, CEOs are going to be very, very busy. They'll take time, but all the work, I think, should be done and driven by somebody like HR's capacity.
Okay, thank you very much. Another one. Tell us some concrete steps one should take to assess the effectiveness of such mentoring programs as a follow-up.
That's very good. You know, a couple of things that we do if you want to really try to measure the effectiveness of a program. So we have a tool that's called Mentor String, and it's kind of built in. We have ROI measures in there. You don't have to do it this. But what I like to be able to do, let's say you have a mentoring relationship, and that person isn't a supervisor of that particular mentee. So they have a relationship. You could send a survey after on, let's say, 6 months or whatever, to check how it's going, to see if both the participants are getting something out of it. But what we do is create what we call a development plan, where the mentee and the mentor work together, and they have a very specific outcome. And we bring in the supervisor, who's going to look at the performance improvement from an objective level. And so if you send a survey to ask the mentee and the supervisor if they see notable improvement in performance or behavior change, then you're getting at a more objective measure, if you will, of whether or not that mentoring relationship is really producing results for the organization. So that's one technique that we use. We use a development plan, individuals, and also goals, and then we have regular surveys that go out, quick little surveys to basically gauge whether or not it's being effective, both from the participants and also from the supervisory impact on the job.
Thank you very much. We have one last question. Okay, how can I make sure my program remains energized and does not lose interest over time?
That's a very good question, and that can happen to all programs. You know, there's a natural tendency when something's new to have energy. You know, our recommendation is always this. You know, if a program gets up and running, you're going to have to do internal marketing. In other words, how can I get more people involved? And then how do I let everyone in the organization know about some success stories and some success metrics? Typically, you know, what you can do is, just as I was telling stories here about people that mentored me, you can also share stories about people and some of the benefits that they're getting out of the mentoring program. And again, even if you have these high-level CXO executives sharing and saying, you know, I started out to share my wisdom with these high-potential employees, but I was learning more about social media or whatever, so we like to share those kinds of stories. We like to share results. I think you always have to be vigilant and not just launch it and think that it will continue on. Always market, always look for new ideas and suggestions, always try to expand participation. So if you start with a pilot program, always be thinking about what's the next step. If I'm using it now for onboarding and orientation, could I tie this same kind of approach into our leadership development program? And if that's successful, can I expand it into, you know, some other kind of inclusion and other kinds of programs within my organization? Always be marketing, always be thinking that we've got to continue to support this and get other people in and share other stories.
Well, thank you very much. That really brings us towards the end of the webinar. I really want to thank you, Mr. Russell, for your time, for delivering this live webinar on Miles platform. And I would like to thank you once again on behalf of the Madinah Institute for Leadership and Entrepreneurship for this excellent presentation. Any concluding remarks that you would like to give before we dismiss out?
No, I just, I'll start back where, I started in the beginning. I think every one of us probably has a story that we can share where someone gave us special attention and changed our lives because they decided to be a coach or a mentor for us. So there's a saying that you may have heard, it's called pay it forward. I want to encourage you to be a mentor, and even more importantly, to set up a successful mentoring program in your organization, because we've seen some significant benefits that can come out of any organization, whether you're small, public, private, or whatever, or large. So I want to encourage everyone to pay it forward and go out and create a mentoring program within your organization. And thank you, Ali, for having me today. It's been a real pleasure to work with your group today.
Thank you very much, sir, and the feelings are mutual. And once again, thank you indeed for this excellent presentation. Thank you all of those who participated in this webinar. Once again, my apologies for little technical glitches that we encountered in the beginning, but I'm glad it was resolved and Mr. Russell was here finally, so we had a very interesting and interactive session. So thank you all of those who participated. We are recording this webinar, which will be uploaded on Mile Community in the next couple of days, so please stay tuned to webinar.mile.org. With that note, we'd like to end this webinar, so you all will be automatically dismissed out. Thank you very much. You all have a good day, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you call.